We're going to be moving on to a second panel, which is going to include a bunch of our leaders from both the state and federal level. I'd like to begin by starting with an introduction of them. They're all very long tenured. They have their fingerprints on some of the most leading legislation, like the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative that set Hawaii off on a pathway in leading our country in renewable energy. They were part of that discussion. Many of them were part of the discussions that built the UH West Hawaii campus, which was a tipping point project on the Leeward Coast that catapulted education on the Leeward Coast. A lot of them were part of that discussion. I want to first introduce United States Representative Colleen Hanabusa. Please join me in welcoming her, Congresswoman Hanabusa. Congresswoman Hanabusa is originally from Oahu and was raised in Waianae. After graduating from the University of Hawaii at Manoa with a law degree, she became a member of the Hawaii State Senate in 1998, serving as Senate President from 2007 to 2010. She then went on to serve in Congress, where she currently serves Hawaii's 1st Congressional District. How about another hand for Congresswoman Colleen Hanabusa? Next up, we have Senate President Ron Kochi. Senate President Ron Kochi is originally from Kauai and has served as president of the Hawaii State Senate since 2015. Prior to this, Senator Kochi served as Majority Caucus Leader, Vice Chair for Committee on Tourism, and Vice Chair for the Committee on Ways and Means. And prior to that, served in the Kauai County Council. Next up is House Speaker Scott Saiki. Speaker Saiki. House Speaker Saiki was born and raised in Honolulu and received his law degree at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. In addition to his leadership role as House Speaker, he serves as a representative for the areas including Makali, Kaheka, Kaka'ako, and downtown Honolulu. I want to thank you folks for joining us this morning. Test. So our format this morning, we're going to be asking our panelists to take a few minutes of their own time to just give some perspectives. And then we have some initial questions that we're going to give them. And we'd like to get some questions from you in the crowd. And they'll come up and we'll try to get some good feedback from you. So I'd like to start with Congresswoman Hanabusa, being that she just got back from Washington, D.C. And I'd like to ask her just to take a few minutes to give some fresh perspectives on what you're seeing out there. So, Congresswoman Hanabusa.
Thank you, Micah. Good morning and aloha, everyone.
Aloha.
Congress, as many of you know, I was there beginning in 2011 to the beginning of 2015 and returned at the end of 2016, and I'm in the 115th Congress now. All I can tell you is that when I got elected the first time, I was in the, quote, minority position. Minority in the sense that's when the House flipped. Nancy Pelosi was no longer Speaker, and at that time it was John Boehner. But we had the Senate, and of course we had the President of the United States in terms of being a Democrat. This time, going back, it is, we don't have anything. We don't have the House, we don't have the Senate, we don't have the President, and we don't have the Supreme Court, which is probably going to have the greatest impact for us in Hawaii. So in terms of the climate, the only thing that I think is going to help us, interestingly, is that for the time that I've been home, my husband said he's going to put parental control on the TV monitor because he says it's not good that I'm yelling at the television every time. But I got to tell you, it's like I can't believe it. Every time I think it can't get worse, it gets absolutely worse. And people say, well, you know, what does it mean? What does it mean for us? The interesting thing is for Hawaii, and we'll get into this later, I noticed that one of the statements that was made, I think by Micah in the presentation of what's going on today, he did say that we'll probably have to look to block grants for all of your nonprofits. And it is fascinating because out of the House, which is probably the worst place to think that you get any kind of money, there are sizable amounts of block grants, which tells me that the one thing that the Republicans are learning is that you cannot just simply cut to zero. I should say that, except for one area dear to Micah's heart, is DHHL, Nahasda. Nahasda is zero, Micah. There's nothing we can do about it. That's still zero. We're trying to see if we can put it back in, but other than all the other programs, except, the other one is East-West Center, which isn't a nonprofit issue, but East-West Center is also zeroed out. But a lot of the different things that are important, like for example, CDBG and CSBG, that's of course for the Hawaii Economic Opportunity Council, and of course the MEO and the Kauai. Those entities are funded by what is called a community service block grant. I know it gets confusing, that's CSBG. Originally, they were zeroed out, but they have been restored. So a lot of the issues that we deal with in Washington, like now the different versions of the appropriation measures are going through, we have to decide whether it's worthwhile to challenge or just go with what we have and hope that the Senate will plus it up. So from the perspective of programs, certain programs are clearly on their quote crosshairs on their radar, but certain other programs appear to be making its way through. And I do want to end with this. I said this in the beginning, and I said, you know, I've never seen a cabinet that has been led by so many former men in uniform, in other words, our generals. And I thought, I wonder if this is an indication of the fact that the president is going to be a warmonger. In actuality, he's trying to become an isolationist. But believe it or not, I started to say, you know, maybe it's good that we have these military generals in control. Now the very liberal blogs like Daily Beast and Politico as a publication, they're beginning to call them the axis of adults. You know, the World War II was the axis of power. They're calling them the axis of adults. Because even for them, they are becoming to be something positive. You know, Bannon is gone because of John Kelly, who was a Marine general. The one that I think even the president does not dare to pick a fight with is General Mattis, who was the Secretary of Defense. He was also a Marine general. And of course, McMaster's, who they tried to pick on, but they're backing down now. He's an Army general. These are former men in uniform, so to speak. And I think they are the stabilizing factor in the Trump cabinet. I don't know whether he's afraid of them because they're all as big as, or maybe stronger than him, or whatever. Who knows how that president thinks. But notwithstanding, remember, axis of adults is not a bad thing.
It's going to be a headline tomorrow. You can see it already.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Hanabusa. So I'd like to give both Senator Kochi and Representative Saiki just an opportunity, before we get into the real details or commentary around what Congressman Hanabusa stated, maybe you can give us kind of just a sense of your mindset and perspectives about where you see Hawaii reacting or pivoting based on what's happening at the federal level. Maybe Senator Kochi, if we can start with you, please.
Aloha.
Aloha.
As Congresswoman Hanabusa talked about getting to Washington, D.C. in 2011 and what the climate was like, I got to the state capitol in 2011, and with the Republicans taking control of the Congress, then they eliminated all of the ARA funds. And all of a sudden, all of this federal assistance in delivering so many social services programs that we were doing at the state, the money disappeared. I was aware when I walked into the state capitol that West Kauai where I grew up, had the highest teen pregnancy rate of any school complex in the state of Hawaii. And that the money to fund teen pregnancy education was part of the money that was being cut. And how were we going to continue to deliver services in areas that had such a critical need? And we needed to find private partners. And we had a $1.2 billion deficit for the biennium, so it wasn't a check that we could readily write as the state of Hawaii. I think as we are dealing with the uncertainty on the federal level, in the latest reports, we've had new actuarials that say, great news, the people in Hawaii are living longer. Bad news, state of Hawaii government, you need to pay pensions longer, so your liability has just increased. It's not realistic to assume a 7.5% rate of return, so now we have to assume 7. So that increased our deficit. Whether it's online retailers and less activity in brick and mortar stores, but our GE tax collections have flattened out. And so as we have these economic forecasts that create challenges for us, as you're facing the problems in Washington, you would hope we had a vibrant economy here and you could turn to the state to help make up that gap to achieve your goals. And it's going to be difficult for us in this current financial environment to be that savior. And so the only way we're going to be able to achieve the missions that each of you do is by having partnerships with the private sector. In 2015, I had the opportunity to do the capital budget and grants and aids for the Senate. So I've met with so many of you. And it broke my heart to do that job because we had $170 million in requests and a $30 million budget. So many great projects weren't going to get funded that year. And so how can we continue to have the partnership? I, on Kauai, work well with the Hawaii Community Foundation. And in particular, we have a group called the Aloha Angels, which started out of the North Shore Rotary. In the last 3 years, they've raised over $1 million, and they have provided for each elementary school teacher $500 for supplies in the classroom, money to do excursions, money to support after-school programs, to create positive avenues for our children. And then when they wanted to start giving money for air conditioning, one guy had a $1,000 check, so that check by itself isn't going to solve the problem. But by bringing it to the Hawaii Community Foundation, which attracts other funders, we were able to leverage the money and do some of the private cooling to the schools besides the money that we had set aside in the state budget. With all of the great work that was done, we then had a $50,000 contribution to Aloha Angels through the Hawaii Community Foundation through Mark Zuckerberg. And so it created a profile. Hawaii Community Foundation had a reputation where Mark Zuckerberg was comfortable to write a $50,000 check. So certainly through those partnerships is how I see us going forward to continue to do the good works you do in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kochi. Senator Kochi has been a big advocate in that specific program in partnership with that coastline. Been very, very effective. Thank you for your support. To you, Representative Saiki, your comments.
Thanks, Micah, for inviting us today. I'll just make a couple of brief comments and kind of as a follow-up to Senate President's remarks. The first thing that I wanted to just mention was what happened in the last legislative session in 2017. One of the main objectives of the legislature is to approve the state budget, and that's what we did in May. Our state budget for the next fiscal year, which began on July 1st, is $14 billion, and that includes federal and state funding sources. The top priority area as far as spending goes is Medicaid. It now accounts for 18% of our state budget. And in second place is lower education at 14%. So what happened a few years ago was Medicaid spending surpassed our public school spending. So that's been a big shift. And next year we project Medicaid spending to increase another percentage to 19%. And one reason why I wanted to mention that is because I think it shows the predicament that the state legislature is in as far as budgeting. I mean, Medicaid is basically a fixed expense, and more and more of our state budget is becoming fixed, and there's less discretionary spending. The other area that we did work on, as the Senate President mentioned, was grant and aids for the nonprofit community. So last year we approved $10 million in operating funds for grants and $20 million in CIP, or the construction projects for nonprofits. As you know, the grant and aid process at the legislature is also discretionary. What happens at the end of the legislative session, the money committees determine how much funds are available for grants, for nonprofit grants, and at that point, the grants are just allocated for applicants. I think that I know that there's a lot of uncertainty with what's happening at the federal level, but there's always a positive, I think, to everything, and the positive for our situation is that we have some time to prepare for that. And I think it's going to be really important for all of us to work together, the nonprofit community and the legislature and the state government, to ensure that there is a continuity in services. The nonprofit sector is important to the legislature, and in a lot of ways, the nonprofit organizations really do drive policies that we act upon every year. And one of the examples that's been mentioned today is the Earned Income Tax Credit. It was the nonprofit community that really worked on this for years and years and years, the last 20 years. It took the legislature 20 years to approve it, but that was something that was called for by the nonprofits. And it's not just in that area, but in other areas as well, environmental, land, social justice issues. It's the nonprofits that really help to really incite the discussion and the decisions at the legislature. So in that respect, I want to just thank everybody for your work with the legislature.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you. I want to direct this question to the Congresswoman. One of the underpinning themes for this conference is one voice toward advocacy, not just one voice from each individual nonprofit or even the sector at large, but as a Hawaii, including our elected bodies. Senate President Kochi, as well as Representative Saiki, facilitated some conversations yesterday that allowed the nonprofit community, with us being the representative, along with a policy center that we're attempting to stand up and the elected body being there, and to start the conversation about having a unified voice of approaching some of these really tough issues we're going to be facing. How can we position this effort so that we can be the best help possible in helping you to assure we are as effective as we possibly can in Hawaii?
Micah, one of the things that we have not mentioned, because it is like the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which I think, I never can tell, which I think we may take on when we go back, is going to be President Trump's proposed tax reform. And the reason I raise that is that as federal monies become scarce and the state's grant and aid program becomes less and less probable because monies are being spent on what Scott was talking about, more like a mandatory spending. As you all know, your ability to operate then will depend on the community. And though we'd like to believe that everyone would be willing to give, the ability to tax deduct those contributions becomes critical. So I think one of the first things that as one voice, and it's a no-brainer, is that you have to be cognizant of that and watch it and have your advocates in Washington or advocate for yourself basically there to say that you cannot affect that. Because you know, when we talk about tax reduction, the income has to come from somewhere. And the way it traditionally has come is you do away with whatever you can deduct or your exemption. So I think that's one of the things that we need to look at. The other thing is that, like with every situation, there is a pie of money, right? So how do you advocate for the pie of money, which is going to shrink in some form or another, but having your particular share of that pie? And that's always going to be difficult. One of the issues that Scott mentioned that is really critical to us is the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare to some. And the reason why is because in the Affordable Care Act is the Medicaid funding. And as you know, Medicaid expansion, which was found constitutional by the Supreme Court with certain modifications, is 100% paid for by the federal government, and it goes down on a sliding scale till it gets to 90%. The significance of that and advocating for that, no matter how you may feel about the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, the reason why that component of it is so critical is because it frees up other money. So yes, it is a big ticket item for the state, but if you were to look at the little initials at the end, I think it would be N, right? Feds are N fund, right? It would probably be, the bulk of it would be N funded, which means that's the source of the money. So all of these different things, when you start to talk about it, it really is a matter of understanding the process, in particular the state, because after us, you know, the money goes usually to the states then allocate it, then the legislature is really the appropriating body. They have to know how and where these monies are sought and for what purpose. I do share with AARP, and I will share with you. They are, of course, very concerned about what will happen to the Affordable Care Act. So when John McCain's very symbolic down, and of course, if it wasn't for Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, his down wouldn't have meant much. But notwithstanding his down vote, I tell AARP, for example, dysfunction in Washington, D.C. is a good thing, because what dysfunction means is status quo. So if you are looking at a situation where you're wondering what are the consequences, yes, we may not be going up in areas that you like, but I tell the retirees and the AARP members, but the fact that we can't move anything means we can't change anything either. So in this particular case, I said, pray for dysfunction. So whenever they're on the same floor with me in
So
my
another headline for tomorrow.
so they're on the same floor with me, and in my federal office is not in the federal building. If anybody wants to come and contact us, we're in 1132 Bishop Street, where the bankruptcy court and the Ninth Circuit is. But literally next door is AARP. So whenever I'm going to the bathroom or coming out, they all tell me, dysfunction. I said, you got it, dysfunction. It's a good thing this time. That means they can't do any harm because status quo prevails.
Thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman. Our next question is for Senator Kochi, and I think I'm going to try to paraphrase this question a little bit. Hawaii is led in some pretty important areas, specifically around the environment, and in some of these areas, perhaps outside the environment, we're starting to make really solid gains. We're not at tipping point yet, and it's being coupled with this compression of a drop in federal funding and maybe some limitations about what we can do here in the state of Hawaii. How is the legislature and how can this body work collaboratively to help prioritize so that we remove the drama from that discussion and really try to be a facilitator and helper in your deliberations towards some of these issues?
Well, I think to the extent that you can achieve the goal of the one voice, then you become more effective. Centuries-old strategy in war is divide and conquer. So the more the divisive voices or differing opinions you have when they come in, you give different members the opportunity to say, I like plan A, I like plan B, I'm with plan C, and all of a sudden you can't get a majority of votes behind a particular direction. With the one voice, you're either on board or you're in the way. And then you need to get out of the way because we're coming, and that's the value of getting to the one voice. The other thing I'd say briefly, and I'm going to tread lightly on how I say it with a former Senate president here and the speaker, I come from the island of Kauai. So when we're in session, I don't want to sit at home watching the morning news being criticized all by myself, so I try to get out early and get my coffee and find people to talk to. And then I don't want to go home at night and sit there by myself watching television, so I'm in the office later. So whenever you call and you need an appointment, I fit you in. I don't have neighborhood board meetings, or my children are adults now, so I don't have to get to soccer games or a school activity. And I don't think that I've turned anybody down in this room who's asked for an appointment. And so my commitment to you is that I still will maintain the same schedule, and to the extent that we're engaged and we're talking, and we better understand where each of us want to get to, why we're passionate about our positions, or maybe as much as I like what you're talking about, it gives me a chance to explain some of the financial limitations I'm dealing with, but at least we're talking to each other and we're engaged in a factual conversation, and we're not sitting in our own silos and making judgments about each other without knowing the facts. And so one voice is certainly critical to be effective, and second, fully engaged in the conversation so that we have a personal relationship and we're emotionally invested, and it's not just a statistic on the paper.
Senator Kochi, let me stay with you just for a second. I know this is something that you're very passionate about, and more than 20% of the audience here today is from the neighbor islands, and you always make a point to recognize the neighbor island constituency in everywhere you go. Granted, it's West Kauai sometimes, but we have a broader group of constituency here. As you know, we tend to be a Honolulu-centric place. How can they be more effective in their communication to the Honolulu office in terms of just as a nonprofit advocate?
Actually, the speaker and I were on a panel for the Hawaii State Association of Counties in June on Kauai, and he went through his new lineup and the leadership team that he has in the House and the identified neighbor island representatives that comprise that. In the Senate, besides myself as president, we have Senator English is the majority leader. We have Senator Baker chairing one of our A bracket committees. Senator Keith Agaran is now the vice chair of Ways and Means from Maui, and he'll be making decisions relative to the capital budget and the grants and aid. So in both of the chambers, the neighbor island members are in key positions to ensure that our voices are heard. For the Ways and Means Committee, every odd year, we go out and do island visits. So island visits are scheduled in mid-October. 2 days they'll be out on Maui County. At the end of October, they'll be spending 3 days on the Big Island, and November 6th and 7th, they will be on Kauai. So to the extent that you can communicate to your members in the Senate about having an opportunity when the Ways and Means visits to get information directly to them when they're on your island, or maybe even get on the site visit schedule. A couple of years ago, Chair Tokuda went to Kauai Economic Opportunity, saw the homeless transitional shelter, the program that they're running there at Kauai Economic Opportunity, and then they got funding in the next 2 years because of how impressed we were with the program, the delivery of service, and their ability to address a critical area of need as far as our priorities go.
Thank you. Representative Saiki, at yesterday's meeting that was held at the legislature, you and Senator Kochi helped bring together nearly 40 elected officials to give Gavin and Nick and myself an opportunity to lay out the policy center. One of the points that came up that I thought was very valid that we didn't think about was a comment that Representative Baladi made. And she pivoted the policy center from being one that is just a receiver of information and a digester for our community to one that could export the great things we're doing in Hawaii towards the world. Can you kind of comment on that a little bit and maybe talk to our audience about that point she was trying to make and what your perspective is on Hawaii's ability to position itself that way, especially in light of the capacity we have in this room in the nonprofit community?
I think it's really important for the center to help, in effect, be somewhat of a clearinghouse on policy issues. One of the areas that we're trying to reform in the House is the ability of the House itself to help to develop policies. We don't really have a lot of infrastructure in place to look at, do deep dives on substantive policy issues. So that's why it's really critical for an organization like the Center to assist us with policy development. And to the extent that the Center can network with nonprofits throughout the state, with advocates throughout the state to bring different perspectives, I think that adds so much more value to the decisions that we can make.
Thank you. I want to go to Congresswoman Hanabusa. This question is related to kind of, I guess, more of a civic engagement context. Across the country, you know, we're seeing a continued reduction in civic engagement. And it appears that based on where we're at, maybe there's an opportunity to re-energize, and we're starting to see that. Nick talked about it in his comments. Some of it is happening as a result of the town hall meetings that are occurring. Can you speak to that right now? Is there an opportunity to rebuild and recatalyze civic engagement across the country so that people feel that their time has value and can be a catalyst for change right now?
Actually, I'm encouraging them to go sit in Senate President's office and also Speaker Saiki's office. That's the first time I ever said Speaker Saiki. I want you to know that. I swore I'd never call him Speaker Saiki. Scott and I go back many, many years. We think, and this is from the Washington perspective, and especially from the Democratic caucus perspective, we feel that what we're calling an organic movement, and you see it, after the president was inaugurated on January 20th, and I will never forget that date, because in Hawaii we have a group that picks things up. Remember, the Women's March was the next day. And what I hope everyone in this room knows is the Women's March has its genesis on Maui and Molokai, Hana and Molokai, right? And they went viral, and then they picked it up on, quote, the mainland, and you saw that amazing march. My mom, who's 86 years old, made a whole bunch of hats. So there's on a website, the Women's March website, where they will all put in and they say, thank you, Auntie June. Auntie June is my mom. And it picked up. After that, this group stayed together, and we in the federal delegation are beneficiaries of it. And they come every Tuesday at 12 o'clock. Each one of us has our own group. That's why I don't want a Senate president or a speaker to feel left out, that they should have their own group too. The governor should have his own group. And they come in and they have all their issues. The most important part of that is the engagement. And they keep going. And I think that that's what you're seeing. We call it the organic movement because it is organic. It's not something that us politicians could ever do. It is something that people were so angry about and wanted to make a statement about. And it wasn't an anti-Trump movement. Remember that March was about women's rights. But to see it continue, and from there, our Republican colleagues, many of them stopped doing town halls because they did not want to have these groups come forward. That is civic engagement. And that is the only way I think that we will get, and you will be able to hold us accountable. That's the bottom line. The only way we build public trust back up again is with ourselves all being responsible and accountable. So I had a group that in the beginning, they may not have agreed with me on many of the policies, but you know what? They come every Tuesday, and we know that if there's a point we're not going to agree on, we just respectfully disagree. But it's that engagement, and that's going to be the success of all of the political structure. So I would encourage you to adopt it. Even if, you don't have to go every Tuesday, but you can go whenever, and then when they continually see you become, I know them all now, and you become not just an application for a grant and aid, it is your face and who you are, and the program becomes, oh yeah, I remember her. Gotta be a good program because she's behind it.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senate President Kochi, thank you. Several estimates put the size of the nonprofit workforce in Hawaii at around 10%. And we want to make that part of our conversation, going forward. The ripple effects that the cuts are going to have federally going to impact that workforce. How do we make that part of our conversation, and what dimension can it play in the conversation if it does?
Well, you've already succeeded by letting us know that that's the size. I guess, especially coming from Kauai, though we're so small, so you've got the executive director, and if you're lucky, a part-time secretary. Most of the time, it's just a one-person office. And so when the cut comes, the service is eliminated on Kauai. It's not that the services get reduced, there's nobody left. A good friend of mine, Ellen Ching, who used to be with the Association for Retarded Citizens of Kauai, as it was called back then, how did she keep her organization viable? She eventually merged her organization in with Easter Seals to find a way to get administrative costs, shared rent, and other things like that. So there are some other strategies that we may have to look at. But I can tell you I'm keenly aware of the impacts and certainly who the particular individuals are. The first job my sister had when she graduated from college was the executive director for the American Heart Association. And so, directly in our family, the nonprofit world has created a pathway to return home and get back to Kauai and find a job and be back with your family. And so I directly understand that, that opportunities also are what allow our children to return home. And that's, as a parent, such a critically important thing to me, to be selfish that way.
We'll make this our last question, and I'll end it with Representative Saiki, and then I just want to give Senator Kochi and Congresswoman Hanabusa just some parting comments to just close us off. Let's see here. It's clear that philanthropy can fill some gaps, and Senator Kochi laid out a couple examples of how we were effective in partnering, but it's not realistic to think that we can do it across the board. And so what is the appropriate role that private philanthropy can play, and how do we partner with the nonprofit community to do that?
I think it's really important, and it's easier said than done. Funders have to help us set priorities on a statewide level. As you've heard this morning, there will be limited resources. I mean, that's something that we need to prepare for. And so it's important for us to set priorities and to avoid duplication, I think to specialize services, create niches. That's something I'm sure that most nonprofits have already gone through in the past and will probably have to reinitiate in the next year or so. But that's going to be something that the legislature will also have to look at when it comes to prioritizing state services and state functions. And it's unfortunately it's just a budget. It's a budget-driven responsibility that's placed on us.
And then maybe just some parting comments for the crowd from your perspective for today's work.
So I think it's, thanks to HCF for organizing this event. I think one-on-one conversation is always the best form of communication. And it's important to have people in the room, because I think, as I've said earlier, that it's going to be really important for all of us to just pull together to get through the next few years.
Thank you, Representative. What I had for Representative Saiki, everyone. Want to go to Senate President Ron Kochi for some parting comments.
So what you can't tell from your seats is how blind we are with the lights in our faces. Calvin, is that you sitting right in front of me? Okay. I mean, I've been trying to look into the crowd to see who was here from Kauai. I like to normally acknowledge them publicly because they vote in my district. I hope it generates positive results. But, 3 quick points. The first is just thank you very much for what you do, because you are serving people who you are passionate about helping, and they need your help, they need our help. And when you can't always deliver the job, you go home, and it certainly takes a personal toll on you emotionally, because it is not just work and then you close the door, you go home, and you can compartmentalize and forget about this. This is your life, their lives become your lives. The second thing I learned in 2015 doing the grants and aid process is how many of the high-powered attorneys, lobbyists, Laurie Lum is one person I can't see in the very back of the room, but how many people give of their time to organizations where their passion lies. And so to all of those who have been giving of their time, doing the pro bono work to help advance the mission, I also want to extend, big mahalo to you. And then the short coaching bit that I have for you, most of you are so passionate that you come in for your 30-minute appointment, and you're busy selling a legislator on what you care about. And you need to remember you're trying to sell somebody to make them care. So you need to think about what's important to them or what might resonate to them. And I know I've mentioned to a couple of people when you've done it to me, you've come in so passionate and you've talked to me for 27 minutes and say, what do you think? I said, I think in 2 minutes my next appointment is going to be here. I'm really sorry that I can't share more of my ideas with you, but you're working on a really great program. So keep your presentation 7 to 10 minutes. Leave about 20 minutes because you really want to find out what the legislator thinks. It'll shock you. We've got egos. We do like to talk. And if they're a little quiet, then you'll be able, as a good advocate, to fill the rest of your 30-minute appointment. But, make them feel like, we really spent the time talking about your interests as you try to go forward. And I think that will help you be a lot more effective communicator when you come to the legislature to advocate on behalf of your constituencies. So I really appreciate everything. The speaker and I, according to what I read in the paper, need to go to a secret meeting now at 11:30.
How about that for Senator Ron Kochi, Senate President Ron Kochi? And finally, some closing comments from our Congresswoman Colleen Hanabusa.
Thank you all for being here. I'm going to borrow from 2 of my experiences. One, as Ron pointed out, that I was Senate President. I think that one of the important things, as I look back on what you do, is some of you rely on grants and aids from the state. And the problem is how we define grants and aids. And what we do is we say that it's really supposed to be a startup situation. It's not supposed to be perpetual. But technically what you do should be perpetual. And we should have some better way of ensuring that you fill the gap that the state services need. Having said that, before coming here, I spoke to what they call NHOA. That's the Native Hawaiian Organization Association. And it's a fascinating structure, and I throw it out there for you to discuss. The reason it's a fascinating structure is that it is a nonprofit, Native Hawaiian, but it doesn't have to be Native Hawaiian, just look at the structure. And then from that, you have what they call 8A companies under there, which are small business, and then they have benefits of doing that by being able to have preferences in terms of bidding and so forth in procurement, which some of you probably do compete with. I think one of the things we have to think about in the future is to have my good friends in the legislature step back and say, okay, if government cannot do all these things, and I heard really good things about what they're doing on Kauai with the homeless population. If government can't do this, then government has to create a structure where we can have the nonprofits and the private sector do it. But how do we create the structure so we can guarantee one thing, which is that it comes back to the community? You're all nonprofits, so that's the assumption. You're not making a, quote, profit. This interesting structure that they have, which, by the way, was a creation of Senator Inoue, what is assumed in that structure for the preference is the fact that they will give back to the community in other areas, whether it's education and so forth. It's sort of what this organization is that's hosting us all today. It's like an umbrella organization. But I'd like for all of you to think outside the box and say, what do we need? You need stability and funding, like everybody else. You need a sense that people appreciate you so you don't have to go on and grovel every year for your monies. But more importantly than that, we need the community outside of this community to feel like you guys are partnering with them. You take care of them. So you need to have them be your advocates as well. And through that, maybe get the legislature to rethink, how do we truly partner with you? Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. On behalf of the nonprofit sector, we want to thank you folks for being here. We know you folks are very busy. You folks are at the top of our leadership,
And they have secret
political
meetings to go to.
and secret meeting to go to. But again, Speaker Saiki, Senate President Ron Kochi, Congresswoman Hanabusa, mahalo for your presence here. Mahalo, everyone.